Naval Enigma, the U-559 incident, the hunt. October 30th, 1942, Eastern Mediterranean, 70 miles north of the Egyptian coast. The sea heaved beneath HMS Petard's hull as she sliced through the Mediterranean darkness. Lieutenant Commander Mark Thornton gripped the bridge rail, salt spray stinging his face as he scanned the horizon through his binoculars. Below deck, the ASDIC operator's voice crackled through the speaker. "Contact bearing 270, range 1,200 yards. Thornton's pulse quickened. For 16 hours, the destroyers of the 12th Destroyer Flotilla had been hunting this U-boat. The German submarine had made the fatal mistake of surfacing too close to a British convoy, its silhouette caught in moonlight before diving deep. Now, as midnight approached, the hunter-killer group had their prey, cornered against the Egyptian shelf. "Full ahead," Thornton ordered. "Prepare depth charges." The Petard surged forward, joined by HMS Hero and HMS Dulverton. Their propellers churned white foam as they converged on the ASDIC contact. Beneath the waves, Unterseeboot 559 twisted through the dark water, her commander Kapitän-Leutnant Hans Heitmann barking orders to his crew of 45 men. The submarine's electric motors whined as she dove to 200 feet, then 300, seeking refuge in the thermal layers. The first depth charge pattern exploded at 23:47 hours. £400 of Amatol detonated in rapid succession, sending shockwaves through the water that hammered against U-559's pressure hull. Light bulbs shattered. Men grabbed for handholds as the submarine shuddered violently. Cork insulation rained from the ceiling. In the engine room, a pipe joint cracked, spraying seawater under tremendous pressure. Heitmann ordered silent running. The crew froze at their stations, breathing shallow, listening to the destroyer propellers passing overhead. The ASDIC pings echoed through the hull, a metallic searching sound that made every man's skin crawl. They could hear the splashes as more depth charges entered the water, waiting, always waiting for the explosions. The second pattern detonated closer. The submarine's stern lifted, then slammed down. An electrical panel sparked, plunging the control room into darkness before emergency lighting kicked in. The chief engineer reported flooding in the after torpedo room. Not catastrophic, not yet. But the pressure hull had been compromised. For 6 hours, the dance continued. U-559 would creep forward on battery power, trying to escape the acoustic dragnet. The destroyers would reacquire contact and drop another pattern. The Mediterranean depths became a chess game, played with sound waves and high explosives. By 01:30 hours, U-559's batteries were nearly depleted. The air had grown thick and foul. Men's faces glistened with sweat in the emergency lighting. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Some crew members had already collapsed. Heitmann faced an impossible choice: surface and face the guns, or stay down and suffocate. He chose to surface. At 01:40 hours, U-559 breached like a wounded whale, her conning tower breaking through the moonlit surface 300 yards from HMS Petard. Water cascaded from her deck as compressed air blew her tanks. The destroyer's searchlights blazed to life, pinning the submarine in brilliant white beams. "All guns, open fire!" Thornton shouted. The petard's 4-inch guns roared. Tracer rounds from the pom-poms arced across the water, stitching lines of phosphorescent green into the submarine's hull. Shells exploded against U-559's conning tower, tearing away the 20mm anti-aircraft gun and its crew. The submarine's deck gun remained silent. There was no time to man it. The decision Heitmann's voice boomed through the U-boat's intercom. "Abandon ship, all hands topside. Demolition charges set for 10 minutes." German sailors poured from the conning tower hatch, many without life jackets, diving into the oil-slicked Mediterranean. Some were cut down by machine gun fire before they hit the water. Others swam desperately away from their dying submarine, knowing the demolition charges would detonate with enough force to kill anyone nearby. But Thornton saw something else. Through his binoculars, he watched the U-boat's bow rise slightly as her stern settled. She wasn't sinking fast. The scuttling charges hadn't detonated yet. And if they could get aboard before she went down, naval intelligence had been screaming for Enigma materials for months. Every briefing emphasized the same point. Capture anything: codebooks, rotors, key settings, message logs. The Naval Enigma, especially the four-rotor M4 variant used by U-boats, remained largely unreadable. Bletchley Park could break some messages with captured material from weather ships and surface vessels, but U-boat traffic stayed dark. Thornton grabbed the signal lamp operator. "Get me a boarding party, now!" First Lieutenant Anthony Fasson was already moving. At 30, he'd served in the Mediterranean theater since 1940, survived the Greek evacuation, and earned a reputation for aggressive action. When the call came for volunteers to board the sinking submarine, he didn't hesitate. "I need 2 men," Fasson announced to the assembled sailors. Able seaman Colin Grazier stepped forward immediately. "22 years old, married with a young son back in Tamworth, he joined the Navy seeking adventure. Behind him came 16-year-old Tommy Brown, technically too young for combat duty, but desperate to prove himself. "Sir, I can swim better than anyone aboard," Brown said. Fasson nodded. "You're with me. Launch the whaler." The small boat hit the water at 01:52 hours. 6 men pulled hard on the oars, racing toward the listing U-boat. German survivors thrashed in the water around them, some crying for help, others simply trying to stay afloat. The petard's searchlights tracked the whaler's progress, turning the nighttime sea into a surreal stage. U-559 wallowed lower with each passing second. Her bow pointed skyward at a 40-degree angle. Water sloshed across her deck, swirling around the base of the conning tower. The demolition charges could detonate at any moment. Standard procedure called for a 10-minute fuse, but mechanical timers were notoriously unreliable. The whaler thumped against the submarine's hull. Fasson grabbed the conning tower ladder and hauled himself up, seawater pouring from his uniform. Grazier followed, then Brown. The 3 men stood on the narrow platform looking down into the open hatch. Dark water lapped at the bottom of the ladder. "Right then," Fasson said. "Let's see what Jerry left behind." Into the depths. The descent into U-559's control room felt like entering a dying creature's belly. Fasson went first, his boots finding purchase on the wet ladder rungs. Emergency lighting still functioned, dim red bulbs that cast everything in a hellish glow. The submarine groaned around them, metal stressed beyond design limits, water dripped from 100 places. The control room was a chaos of abandoned stations. Charts lay scattered across the navigator's table. Coffee mugs had spilled across instrument panels. A photograph of someone's girlfriend or wife floated in the rising bilge water. The air reeked of diesel fuel, sweat, and something electrical burning. "There!" Grazier pointed to a cabinet mounted on the forward bulkhead. Fasson wrenched it open. Inside, codebooks wrapped in weighted bags, ready to be thrown overboard in an emergency. The Germans hadn't had time. He grabbed them, tossing them up through the hatch to Brown, who caught them and passed them down to the whaler crew. "Keep looking," Fasson ordered. They moved through the submarine like practiced thieves, though neither had ever been aboard a U-boat before. Adrenaline and training guided them. The radio room yielded more prizes: logbooks, signal procedures, a stack of encrypted messages waiting to be transmitted. Grazier found the Enigma machine itself, still mounted at the radio operator station. The four-rotor M4, exactly what Bletchley Park needed. He began disconnecting it, unscrewing the mounting bolts with fingers made clumsy by cold water. The submarine lurched. Her angle steepened to 50 degrees. Water surged through the control room, knee-deep now, rising faster. A terrible grinding noise echoed through the pressure hull, bulkheads failing, compartments flooding. "We need to go," Brown shouted from above. But Fasson and Grazier had found something else. In the captain's quarters, shoved into a desk drawer, the current key settings for November 1942, the Holy Grail. With these, Bletchley Park could read every U-boat message sent that month. Fasson stuffed the papers inside his shirt. One more sweep. They moved aft, the water now waist-deep and rising. The submarine's stern was completely submerged. She had minutes left, maybe seconds. In the torpedo room, they found maintenance logs, targeting tables, more procedural documents. Everything went up through the hatch. Brown caught each item, his young arms working like pistons as he passed documents to the whaler. The boat crew had already pulled away 15 feet, afraid of the suction when the submarine went down. Brown would have to throw the remaining materials. U-559 shuddered violently. A bulkhead collapsed somewhere aft with a sound like a cannon shot. The lights flickered and died. Now only moonlight filtered down through the conning tower hatch, illuminating the rising water. "That's it! Up! Now!" Fasson yelled. Grazier started climbing. His hands found the ladder, but the angle was too steep. The submarine was nearly vertical, bow pointing at the stars. He slipped, splashed back into the water. Tried again. Fasson reached down, grabbed Grazier's collar, hauled him toward the ladder. The water was at their chests, then their necks. Brown, standing on the conning tower platform, watched the Mediterranean pour into the hatch like water into a bathtub drain. The whirlpool effect had started. "Come on!" he screamed. Grazier's head appeared in the hatch. He reached up. Brown grabbed his hand. The submarine's bow reached vertical, then past vertical. She was going stern first, driven down by the weight of flooded compartments. The sacrifice time fractured. Everything happened simultaneously, yet stretched into geological slowness. Brown pulled with strength he didn't know he possessed, dragging Grazier toward the hatch opening. Grazier's torso cleared the hatch, his waist, but his legs remained below, and the suction was tremendous. "Let go!" Grazier shouted. "Save yourself!" Brown held on, his fingers locked around Grazier's wrist. Behind Grazier, somewhere in the flooding darkness, Fasten was still trying to climb. The whaler crew screamed warnings. The petard's searchlight remained fixed on the conning tower, now the highest point on a sinking submarine. Everyone aboard the destroyer watched, helpless. U-559 accelerated downward. The suction became irresistible. Brown felt his own feet leave the conning tower platform. He was being pulled into the hatch. Grazier saw it happening. "Tommy, let go!" Brown released. Grazier dropped back into the submarine. The last thing anyone saw was his hand reaching upward. Then the sea swallowed him. Fason never made it to the ladder. He drowned in the control room, clutching the documents that would change the war. Brown hit the water as the conning tower submerged. The suction grabbed him, tried to drag him down into the depths. He fought it, kicked, clawed at the water. His lungs burned, his vision tunneled. But 16 years of swimming in English rivers had made him strong. He broke the surface, gasping, just as the submarine's bow slipped beneath the waves. The whaler crew pulled him aboard. He lay in the bottom of the boat, shaking, retching seawater. Around him floated the documents he'd saved. Codebooks, cipher keys, signal procedures, and the Enigma machine wrapped in someone's jacket. The Mediterranean settled. Oil spread across the surface, rainbow slicks in the searchlight beams. German survivors clung to debris. U-559 was gone, carrying 42 men to the bottom. 3 had died during the surface action. Heitmann and 2 others would be rescued by the destroyers. Thornton ordered the whaler back to Petard. The recovered materials were wrapped in canvas and locked in the captain's safe. The destroyers resumed picking up survivors. By 04 hours, they'd recovered 37 Germans. 8 were dead. At 8:30 hours, Thornton sent an encrypted signal to Alexandria. Have recovered Enigma materials from sunken U-boat. First Lieutenant Fasten and able seaman Grazier killed in action during boarding operation. The prize. The materials from U-559 reached Bletchley Park on November 12, 1942. They arrived in a locked courier case, accompanied by 2 Royal Marine Guards who'd been ordered to shoot anyone who tried to intercept them. At Hut 8, the Naval Enigma section, cryptanalyst Rolf Nosquith broke the seal and spread the contents across a work table. His hands trembled as he examined each item. The four-rotor M4 Enigma machine was complete and undamaged. The Kriegsmarine had introduced this variant specifically for U-boat communications in February 1942, and it had created a cryptographic blackout that lasted 10 months. Bletchley Park called it the dark period. Unable to read U-boat traffic, unable to route convoys away from wolf packs, unable to save ships carrying food, fuel and weapons to Britain. Now they had the machine itself. But more importantly, they had something even more valuable. The Kurtz signal heft, the short signal codebook that allowed U-boats to send compressed position reports, and the Wetterkurzschlüssel, the weather short signal book. These small pamphlets, printed on water-soluble paper that the Germans believed had dissolved when U-559 sank, contained the keys to rapidly decrypting thousands of messages. Alan Turing arrived from Hut 4 within the hour. He'd been working on the four-rotor problem since February, with limited success. The addition of the fourth rotor multiplied the possible combinations from 159 quintillion to 1.9 sextillion. Even the bombs, the electromechanical computing machines designed to crack Enigma, couldn't handle the computational load. But with the captured key settings and codebooks, they didn't need to. Run December's traffic through first, Turing instructed. We need current intelligence. By midnight, they'd broken their first four-rotor message. Then another. By dawn, Hut 8 was reading U-boat communications nearly in real time. The impact was immediate and devastating for the Germans. On December 1st, convoy HX-217 received orders to divert around a wolf pack based on decrypted U-boat position reports. Not a single ship was lost. On December 4th, RAF Coastal Command received precise coordinates for 3 U-boats refueling from a supply ship. All 3 were sunk. Kapitän zur See Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat fleet, noticed the pattern immediately. Convoys were evading his patrol lines with uncanny precision. U-boats were being attacked in areas where no British forces should have been. In his headquarters at Kerneval, France, he ordered an investigation into security procedures. The investigation concluded that Enigma remained unbreakable. The British must have developed advanced radar or direction-finding equipment. Perhaps spies in French ports were reporting U-boat departures. The mathematics of the four-rotor Enigma made breaking it inconceivable. Dönitz never suspected the truth. Neither did most of the German high command. They continued using Enigma until the war's end, never knowing that a sinking submarine and 3 British sailors had handed the Allies the keys to their most secret communications. The reckoning. The Admiralty recognized the value of what Fasson and Grazier had accomplished, but revealing the truth remained impossible. Announcing that Britain could read German codes would cause the Germans to change their cipher systems immediately. The intelligence advantage would vanish, so the story stayed secret. On December 2nd, 1942, the London Gazette published brief citations. First Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier for outstanding bravery in boarding a sinking enemy submarine. Both were awarded the George Cross, posthumously. Tommy Brown received the George Medal. At 16, he became one of the youngest recipients in the decoration's history. The citation mentioned rescuing classified materials under fire, but gave no details about what those materials were or why they mattered. Brown returned to duty aboard HMS Petard. He survived the war, only to die in 1945 when his sister's house caught fire and he went back inside to save her. He was 17. The families of Fasson and Grazier knew their men had died heroically, but they didn't know why. They couldn't know that those deaths had saved thousands of Allied sailors and helped shorten the war. The full story remained classified until 1974, when the British government finally acknowledged the scope of the Bletchley Park operation. By then, both men had been dead for 32 years. Grazier's son, who'd been a baby when his father died, learned for the first time what his father had accomplished. The cryptographic intelligence gained from U-559 contributed directly to winning the Battle of the Atlantic. In November 1942, the month before the materials reached Bletchley Park, 119 Allied ships, totaling 729,160 tons, were sunk by U-boats. By March 1943, with decrypted intelligence guiding convoy routing and anti-submarine operations, monthly losses had dropped to 82 ships. By May 1943, they'd turned the corner entirely. 41 U-boats were sunk that month, a loss rate the Kriegsmarine couldn't sustain. Dönitz withdrew his U-boats from the North Atlantic in May 1943, ending the campaign that had nearly strangled Britain. The materials recovered from U-559 weren't the only factor. Improved radar, escort carriers, long-range aircraft and better tactics all played crucial roles. But the intelligence breakthrough provided the margin of victory. The U-boat war continued until Germany's surrender, but it never again threatened Britain's survival. The supplies kept flowing, the troops kept training, the invasion kept building, and in June 1944, those troops crossed the Channel to begin the liberation of Europe. All because two men chose to descend into a sinking submarine, and one teenage boy chose to hold on until the last possible second before letting go. The technical victory. The significance of the U-559 capture extended far beyond the immediate intelligence gains. The materials recovered that night in October 1942 revealed the entire architecture of German naval communication security. Each codebook, each key sheet, each procedural document added another piece to the puzzle that Bletchley Park had been struggling to solve for nearly 3 years. The Kurtz signal heft proved particularly valuable. U-boats operated under strict radio silence to avoid detection, but they still needed to report their positions, weather conditions, and enemy sightings. The short signal book allowed them to compress these reports into brief encrypted transmissions that lasted only seconds. Without the codebook, even if Bletchley Park could decrypt the message, they couldn't understand what the compressed signals meant. With it, every U-boat position report became instantly readable. The weather codebook solved another critical problem. German weather ships in the North Atlantic transmitted encrypted meteorological data that U-boats used for navigation and tactical planning. These transmissions followed a different encoding system than standard Enigma messages. The captured Wetterkurzschlüssel gave Bletchley Park the ability to read weather traffic, which in turn provided cribs, known plaintext fragments, that helped break other Enigma keys. Beyond the immediate cryptographic value, the physical Enigma machine itself provided crucial information about German engineering and security procedures. The four-rotor M4 variant had been introduced specifically because German intelligence suspected the three-rotor version might be vulnerable. The machine's construction revealed how the fourth rotor worked, what positions it could occupy, and how the reflector system had been modified. This technical intelligence informed the design of improved bomb machines capable of attacking four-rotor keys. Gordon Welchman, who headed Hut 6 at Bletchley Park, later wrote that the U-559 materials transformed our ability to read U-boat traffic from sporadic success to systematic penetration. The difference wasn't just quantity, it was quality. Before U-559, Bletchley Park might decrypt a U-boat message days after transmission, when the tactical situation had changed completely. After U-559, they were reading messages within hours, sometimes minutes. The intelligence fed directly into the Royal Navy's operational planning. The submarine tracking room in the Admiralty's basement received decrypted U-boat position reports and used them to plot wolfpack formations across giant wall maps of the Atlantic. Convoy routes could be adjusted in real time to avoid concentrations of U-boats. When avoidance wasn't possible, escort carriers and long-range aircraft could be vectored to exact coordinates for preemptive strikes. The Germans noticed. How could they not? But their faith in Enigma's mathematical invulnerability prevented them from accepting the obvious conclusion. When Admiral Dönitz raised concerns about security breaches, his staff conducted analysis after analysis, each concluding that breaking Enigma remained mathematically impossible. The British must have other sources: radar, direction finding, aerial reconnaissance, captured U-boat crews breaking under interrogation. Never Enigma itself. This cognitive dissonance persisted throughout the war. Even when British forces seemed to have impossible foreknowledge of German operations, even when convoys executed seemingly prescient evasive maneuvers, even when U-boats were attacked in mid-ocean locations where no British forces should have been, the German naval staff clung to their faith in Enigma's security. The mathematics said it couldn't be broken, therefore it hadn't been broken. They were wrong. And the materials from U-559 proved it beyond doubt. The human cost. The story of U-559 isn't just about cryptography and intelligence victories. It's about the men who died on both sides of that October night. 42 German sailors went down with their submarine. Most were in their early 20s. Many had wives and girlfriends back home who would receive telegrams with the standard language: missing in action, presumed dead. And their families would spend the rest of their lives wondering exactly how their sons, husbands and brothers had died, whether it had been quick or prolonged, whether they'd suffered. Kapitän Leutnant Hans Heitmann survived. He spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, tormented by survivors' guilt. Naval tradition held that a captain should go down with his ship, but Heitmann had been blown off the conning tower during the surface engagement. He didn't choose to survive. The sea made that choice for him. Other survivors from U-559 faced similar psychological burdens. They'd abandoned their shipmates, left them to drown. Intellectually, they knew the order to abandon ship had come from their captain. Emotionally, they carried the weight regardless. Anthony Fasson left behind a mother and a sister in Edinburgh. They received the telegram on November 3rd. Regret to inform you, First Lieutenant Anthony Fasson killed in action. Later came a letter from his captain praising his heroism, but the details remained vague, classified. His mother attended the investiture at Buckingham Palace, where the king presented his George Cross posthumously. She held the medal in her hands, feeling its weight, knowing it represented something important, but not knowing exactly what. That ignorance persisted until 1974, when the Enigma secret finally became public. Colin Grazier's widow Olive was 22 when she learned her husband had died. Their son was 18 months old, too young to remember his father's face. Olive never remarried. She kept Colin's photograph on the mantelpiece for the next 60 years, refusing to move it even when well-meaning relatives suggested she should move on with her life. "He gave his life for his country," she would say. "The least I can do is remember." Oh, when the Enigma story broke in 1974, Olive finally understood the magnitude of what Colin had accomplished. Her husband hadn't just died in a combat action. He'd helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. He'd saved thousands of lives. The knowledge brought pride, but it also brought anger. Why had the government waited so long to tell the truth? Why had she spent 32 years not knowing what her husband's death had meant? Tommy Brown became a celebrity after the war, at least briefly. The youngest George Medal recipient, the boy who'd risked his life to save Enigma materials. Newspapers wanted interviews. He gave a few, always careful to follow the Official Secrets Act restrictions. He couldn't mention Enigma or code breaking. He could only say he'd helped recover important materials from a sinking enemy submarine. The attention made him uncomfortable. He didn't feel like a hero. He'd let go of Grazier's hand. He'd saved himself instead of his shipmate. Logically, he knew Grazier had ordered him to let go, that staying on the conning tower would have killed them both. But logic didn't ease the guilt. In 1945, Brown was on leave, staying at his sister's house in North Shields. A fire broke out, faulty electrical wiring in the walls. His sister was trapped upstairs. Brown ran into the burning building and carried her out. Then he went back for others. On his third trip inside, the stairs collapsed. He was found later in the wreckage, dead from smoke inhalation. He was 17 years old. Some called it redemption. Brown himself might have seen it that way. A chance to save someone when it mattered, to not let go this time. But his sister, who lived to be 86, always said he had nothing to redeem. He was a hero twice over, first in the Mediterranean and then in North Shields. The world just took too long to recognize it. The strategic impact. The intelligence from U-559 rippled through the entire Allied war effort. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just about cargo ships and tonnage statistics. It was about Britain's survival as an independent nation and staging ground for the liberation of Europe. Every shipment of food from America meant British civilians didn't starve. Every shipment of oil meant RAF fighters could patrol the Channel. Every shipment of weapons meant factories could produce tanks and artillery for the eventual invasion. In early 1942, the situation had been desperate. U-boats were sinking ships faster than American and British shipyards could build them. At current rates, simple mathematics said the Allies would run out of merchant shipping by mid-1943. Britain would be strangled into submission without a single German soldier landing on English soil. The invasion of Europe would become impossible. The war in the West would be lost. The materials from U-559 helped reverse that trajectory. Between December 1942 and May 1943, decrypted U-boat positions allowed convoy routing that reduced losses by approximately 40% compared to the expected rate. That 40% translated to hundreds of ships, millions of tons of cargo, and tens of thousands of lives saved. Merchant sailors who made it home instead of dying in burning oil slicks. Convoy escorts who fought U-boats on more favorable terms. Civilian populations who received food instead of tightening their belts another notch. The strategic calculations shifted. Instead of facing merchant shipping exhaustion, the Allies now had surplus capacity to plan amphibious operations. The invasion of North Africa in November 1942 proceeded on schedule. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 used shipping that would have been at the bottom of the Atlantic without Enigma intelligence. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 assembled the largest amphibious fleet in history, possible only because the Battle of the Atlantic had been won. Even the timing mattered. Every month the Battle of the Atlantic continued. Germany gained time to fortify the French coast, develop new weapons like jet aircraft and ballistic missiles, and potentially achieve breakthroughs in nuclear research. The intelligence from U-559 helped end the battle in May 1943 instead of late 1943 or early 1944. That 6 to 12-month acceleration potentially saved the entire Allied war effort from disaster. Consider the counterfactual. Without the U-559 materials, Bletchley Park continues struggling with four-rotor Enigma through 1943. U-boat attacks remain effective. Merchant shipping losses continue at unsustainable rates. The North Africa campaign might still succeed, but Sicily and Italy become questionable. The D-Day invasion gets delayed to 1945. Germany has another year to develop V-2 rockets, jet fighters, and possibly atomic weapons. The Eastern Front grinds on with astronomical casualties. The Holocaust claims even more victims. In that alternate timeline, the war might still end in Allied victory, but at what cost? How many more millions dead? How many more cities destroyed? How much longer would recovery take? Those questions can never be answered with certainty, but they frame the significance of what happened in the Mediterranean on October 30th, 1942. Two men descended into a sinking submarine. They recovered materials they couldn't fully understand. They died in the attempt. And their sacrifice changed the trajectory of human history, the final accounting. The story of U-559 raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of heroism and sacrifice in wartime. Fasson and Grazier didn't know exactly what they were recovering. They knew Enigma materials were valuable. Every British sailor had been briefed on that point, but they couldn't know the materials would help win the Battle of the Atlantic. They couldn't know thousands of lives would be saved because of their actions. They couldn't calculate the strategic implications or the historical significance. They just knew they had a mission. Board the submarine, grab whatever intelligence materials they could find, and get out before she sank. They executed that mission with extraordinary courage and died in the attempt. The strategic consequences came later, understood by analysts and historians with the benefit of hindsight. This raises the question, what makes an action heroic? Is it the intention or the consequence? Fasson and Grazier intended to support the war effort by recovering intelligence materials. That intention remained constant, whether the materials proved strategically decisive or merely tactically useful. The heroism of their actions, boarding a sinking enemy submarine under fire, existed independent of the outcome. But the consequence matters too. History remembers them not because they were brave in the abstract, but because their bravery produced tangible results. Countless other sailors displayed equal courage in forgotten actions that produced no strategic impact. Their bravery was real, but history moved on without recording their names. This uncomfortable truth reveals something about how we construct historical narratives. We remember the heroes whose actions changed outcomes, not necessarily the heroes whose actions were most courageous. A random sailor who died pulling shipmates from burning water in some forgotten convoy action might have shown greater bravery than Fasson and Grazier, but we don't know his name because his death didn't affect the war's trajectory. The families of forgotten heroes understand this distinction viscerally. They know their loved ones died bravely, but the world didn't notice. The medals weren't awarded. The historians didn't write books. The memorials don't list the names. The sacrifice was real, but it vanished into the statistical anonymity of wartime casualties. Fasson, Grazier, and Brown escaped that fate. They died, but their deaths meant something measurable. The materials they recovered helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, helped shorten the war, helped save lives. Their families eventually learned the full story and found some measure of consolation in knowing the sacrifice hadn't been wasted. But what about the 42 German sailors who died aboard U-559? What did their deaths mean? They were fighting for a regime that committed genocide and started a war of conquest. Does that make their deaths less tragic? Their families mourn just as deeply as British families. Their final moments drowning in a submarine were just as terrifying as any Allied sailor's death at sea. History tends to strip enemy casualties of individual identity. They become statistics. Tonnage sunk, U-boats destroyed, enemy killed in action. But each was a person with a life story, relationships, hopes, and dreams. Most were conscripts or volunteers who joined the Kriegsmarine before fully understanding what Nazi Germany would become. They served because their country demanded it, fought because orders required it, and died because the mathematics of warfare said some percentage of combatants must die for outcomes to be achieved. The moral calculus becomes even more complex when considering that the intelligence recovered from U-559 led directly to the sinking of dozens more U-boats. Thousands of German submariners died because Bletchley Park could read their communications and vector Allied forces to intercept them. Each death was a human tragedy, regardless of the uniforms involved. Yet those deaths also saved Allied lives. Every U-boat sunk meant fewer merchant ships torpedoed, fewer convoys attacked, fewer sailors dying in burning oil. The strategic necessity was clear: sink U-boats or lose the war. But the human cost remained real on both sides. This is the final accounting of U-559. 2 British sailors died recovering materials that helped kill thousands of German sailors, which saved tens of thousands of Allied sailors, which enabled the invasion of Europe, which led to Nazi Germany's defeat and the end of the Holocaust. The chain of causation is clear. The moral mathematics is complex. The human tragedy is universal. War produces these calculations: strategic necessities, acceptable losses, mission-critical objectives. The language abstracts the reality of men drowning in submarines, burning in merchant ships, dying in aircraft crashes, and bleeding out on beaches. But the abstraction doesn't erase the individual experience of dying or the grief of those left behind. The materials from U-559 were worth the cost in cold strategic terms. They helped win the war. But that calculation occurs in a moral universe where worth the cost means weighing one group of lives against another, where the death of 2 men to save thousands is mathematically favorable but individually tragic, where victory requires sacrifice and sacrifice requires death. Fasson and Grazier made their choice. They boarded the submarine knowing they might die. They died knowing they might have recovered something valuable. They couldn't know just how valuable, couldn't know the chain of causation their actions would trigger, couldn't know their names would be remembered 80 years later. They just did their duty as they understood it, and history decided the rest. That's the final truth of U-559. Heroism is performed in the moment, with incomplete information and uncertain outcomes. The significance is assigned later by survivors and historians and nations trying to make sense of the chaos. The materials recovered that night helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, but the men who recovered them died without knowing. They did their job. That's all any sailor can do. History decides what it meant.